Hello guys, it's Matt and welcome to another optimization guide. This time it's for Kena, Bridge of Spirits, and this is one of the best looking games of the year. It's funny how these Pixar animation looking games are now getting out of hand, but I'm not complaining because it just looks so good and it has this certain charm to it. Before we get into our guide, let me tell you that this game is quite intensive on today's hardware, especially when you crank up all these settings. But the good news is that the graphics settings scales very well as you tweak the settings, not unlike the other action game. That's not to say it's perfect however, but we'll get to that later. So I'm gonna first show you my specs here to help you adjust your expectations in using this guide. My objective is always how I would tinker my settings every time I boot a game for the very first time. So my rule is achieve the best visual quality while targeting 70 FPS and above during general gameplay. My exceptions are for those specific non-recurring moments where frame rate drops within the 60s range can be permitted. Let's begin. For our first step, let's select Ultra preset at 1440p for us to establish the lowest possible frame rate, where the only way to go is up. The very first setting I recommend to turn down is the biggest performance hitter, shadow quality. From Ultra, turn it down to high. The visual difference on indoor scenes are barely noticeable, but high shadows alone can provide around 10 frames per second. Moving outside, the visual differences are even more noticeable and the performance gains even greater. On here, for example, you can see the shadows are more defined on Ultra, but there's a 15 FPS difference and high doesn't look bad at all. In fact, it looks like those soft shadows we always love to turn on. Turning down shadows to high also affects shadows rendered in the distance, but the amount of performance gains are far more significant than the visual difference, so that's why shadows should be the first thing to be set to high. If you're still dropping below 60 and you still want additional FPS, our second step is to turn down volumetric quality from high to medium. For me, this was the difference maker in pushing my frame rate from barely reaching 60 to well over 60 on the game's most GPU intensive spots. Don't let the label medium fool you, because volumetric fog still looks refined even when compared to high. On some games, this would usually result in pixelated light shafts with crawling artifacts, but on this game, medium volumetric looks very similar to high. It can look blurry around the edges in side-by-side comparisons, but on its own when you play the game, it still looks pristine and the performance benefit you get is very substantial, around 10 to 15 FPS.
There she is! Run!
Are you hitting 60 now? If not, then our third step is post-processing quality. Now this is more of a subtle setting than the rest due to its performance impact being not as consistently noticeable than the others. However, while changing settings may not be felt when you're just roaming around, having post-processing on Ultra significantly tanks frame rate when transparency and alpha effects are rendered close to the camera. Notice how foliage when being drawn near to the camera become more translucent to accommodate the visibility of your character. It is during these moments where turning down post-processing quality to high matters a lot. But on the flip side, you're going to lose the cinematic bokeh depth revealed during select scenes when the game calls for its effect, but when you're just playing the game, you won't notice its absence. I would like to emphasize, however, to never go below high if you want visual quality. Not only is the performance gain insignificant, but you're going to lose high quality subsurface scattering once you select medium. This affects the bouncing of light on skin and environment materials, which creates the signature Pixar-like look. If you can, just use high. Now, those steps should already be enough for modern hardware users to hit 60 FPS and beyond, but if you're still looking for more without sacrificing visual quality, then our fourth step is Ambient Occlusion. This is the option I was referring to when I said the game's graphics settings aren't perfect. This is because the AO setting is somewhat bugged, at least to an AMD GPU user like me. Comparing the three AO values, medium looks to have washed out shadows on certain scenes while reporting the correct scaling per performance. Look at this log right here. Moving from high to low improves performance drastically, but the shadows inside the log are either missing or washed out on medium. Same goes for this rock face right here. And again on this region. I can't find a reasonable explanation for this, guys. Maybe it's just unique to me. Please tell me if you're also experiencing the same phenomena down in the comments. Don't let that distract you though, because low and high ambient occlusion looks crazily similar. I'm actually quite surprised how low AO in this game doesn't remove ambient occlusion completely and still looks good compared to high. And what's even crazier is the amount of performance gains you get. Close to 10 frames per second. It's just amazing. And we're done. Those are just the 4 settings you need to focus on. The rest, well, they either bring no significant gains or just make the game too ugly to look at. Vegetation, for example, only gives you 2 FPS when moving down to its lowest value, and it introduces more vegetation pop-in. Setting textures on low also gives you a measly 2 FPS while making the game look like unrendered vomit. Ugh. One last thing, I recommend using DX11 for now because on my experience, DX12 not only results in lower averages, but it's also riddled with frame pacing spikes that make the game stuttery and jumpy when traversing the world. But be sure to test this out on your machine because this might be a me thing, and just comment down your findings below. So here is our optimized settings compared to the Ultra preset. Can you see any visual difference? One thing's very obvious though, and that's optimizing the game brings huge wonders to our performance. That's it for me, guys. I hope this guide helps you out. Just comment down your questions or anything you'd like to share. I'll do my best to address your concerns, okay? Until next time, guys, enjoy gaming and take care.